All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Justice with Jax. This is Season 2, Episode 3. I'm your host, Jacqueline Armendariz Unzueta, a.k.a. Jax, and this is going to be a really fun episode.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about the guest today. This is someone committed to stepping up for our community and making history. I'm going to let him introduce himself for a second. So, as we know, this show is a vehicle for updates about the U.S. civil rights case, Armendariz versus City of Colorado Springs. And so today is Friday, September 27th, 2024. That's 1 year, 1 month, 27 days since our case was filed, 424 days in all. And we have our guest, Jeremy. He's going to introduce himself in a second. And so I threw in an extra special tidbit. It's 38 days until Election Day 2024,
nice. Yeah.
Which we need to talk about. You're going to hear more about that.
Approaching.
Yes. And so, Jeremy, do you mind introducing yourself, your pronouns, your affiliations, everything you want to share with folks?
Sure. I'm Jeremy Dowell. I'm a local attorney running for district attorney. My pronouns are he, him. And I guess, I'm in this race to challenge the way that things have been done here unchallenged for 40 years or more.
Let's talk about that, because that's a little factoid that I really wanted to make sure people who are watching this know, because the way I approach this show, bit of an educational vehicle, like I'm having a lived experience of legal process that is somewhat unique,
Yeah.
and really telling that story. And so part of the story we get to tell with you today is that essentially Republicans have gone completely unchallenged for the 4th Judicial District Attorney race almost since I was born.
Mm-hmm.
I was born in 87, and the last time a Dem ran was 1988 here for our candidate of DA.
Yeah.
So, regardless, honestly, I think of political affiliation, I think we can all name that something going just completely unchallenged isn't helping our situation. That's a status quo, and I think something we'll talk about a little bit more probably.
Yeah.
And so some of the updates that I can give about the case where I'm a co-plaintiff with the Chinook Center, a local nonprofit, is that I mentioned last time we are in the appellate system, right? We're in the U.S. District Court 10th Circuit. And so while our attorneys with the American Civil Liberties Union of Colorado have submitted our opening brief, now process-wise, the other party, right, the plaintiff, will be submitting their answer. And that will happen sometime approximately the 3rd week of October. So as Jeremy well knows, as an attorney, there's plenty of process. And I finally get to say, I am not an attorney, but I have an attorney on the show. I always make a disclaimer that I am speaking strictly for myself, and I am not an attorney, right?
Right.
And so, we still have time to wait yet. And then once their answer is filed, we did ask for oral arguments. So we are anticipating that we will go to the court seat in Denver and hopefully hit that milestone. So that's another part of process where you can never guarantee the timeline, right, Jeremy?
Yeah.
Yeah,
for sure.
And so,
I mean, I'm interested in just hearing what is your, how do you feel whenever you're gearing up for one of those appearances? It's got to be nerve-wracking.
It is. And I was actually just reflecting the other day because the impact, there's a reason that this case is filed, right? Sure, my name is on it and I talk about it on the show, but it is much more in the interest of the community and making sure that our First Amendment rights, our Fourth Amendment rights, that's free speech and privacy, are protected. And, police and law enforcement, they're an extension of the government, and so accountability there is important too, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And for me, that's what this is about. So how I feel is I was reflecting, there's still impacts on my life today where I think some of my neighbors still don't talk to me because they saw the police come to my house and they saw the police, seize all my electronic devices and rifle through my home. And so, as we know, which is why I'm so excited to have you here, Jeremy, is talking about this is Justice with Jax. So we talk about the legal system.
Yeah.
So, I'd be really grateful, we're going to dive into it, but just to hear from you, from your perspective of, running as a DA and your litigation experience. So how I feel is motivated, but a little bit tired, a little bit, not a little bit, a lot bit anxious. Yeah. And it's like, we talk about this on the show too, that there's a journey happening here. And that's why this podcast is important. It's a story about what this community has been through, and that's why I invite, community voices on, like you,
Sure.
because you're stepping up for community, which, if anything, I always want to emphasize is if you want change in the community, if you want to, take an action that you think could make a difference, running for office, I think, is one of the bravest things you could do. So let's talk
It's
a little
challenging,
bit.
you know?
It's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit about, I'm switching my note system here
Oh,
because
sure.
we have all the different channels. But let's talk a little bit about your experience so far as a litigator. And one of the things I'd love to hit on with you is that I really believe that the district attorney office is one of those totally slept on offices. District attorneys actually have a profound amount of jurisdiction and let's just say power.
Oh, yeah.
So will you talk a little bit the context of your experience?
Well, sure. First of all, you're absolutely right. The district attorney's office, people do not have any appreciation for how powerful they are. And so, they get to decide, they receive reports from the police, and they
Right.
decide whether to move
But
forward
they are
with
not
it.
the police.
They're not the
right?
police, right? And that's a separate issue, I think, that needs to be addressed. And
As do
I'd be
I,
happy
Jeremy.
I'd
We'll
be
talk
happy to
about
talk
it.
about that.
Yeah.
But they receive reports from the police about allegations that a particular crime has happened, right? And maybe some preliminary investigation, or depending on what issue is being talked about here, maybe there's some substantial investigation that's gone on. But the district attorney's office then takes that pile of information and decides, are we going to move forward with this case, or is there not enough evidence to move forward, right? And that's completely removing politics from
That's
that.
process.
That's just the process
Yeah.
of it, right? You often hear people say, and it's repeated in popular culture, media, and stuff like that. You'll hear it on shows all the time. So and so is going to press charges, right? I am or I'm not going to press charges. The case isn't moving forward because I'm not pressing charges. That's not how it works. So it's the DA's decision whether to quote unquote press charges or not, right? But we have this popular misunderstanding that the individual plays a strong role in that process, and they don't. Once the police have been involved, it's no longer an individual decision.
It's the state, right? Because that's something I've always found interesting as well, is that, in my experience, part of my story here is it was frankly very painful to have the accusation against me falsely that I had attempted to assault an officer after they're the ones who really antagonized us, and I simply reacted. And so when I was going through the system here, right, this was your opponent's judicial district's office. Michael Allen.
And the people of Colorado, right?
That is what I was going to point out.
Yeah.
It hurt me that the accusation was that I had hurt the people of Colorado. Right. And so that's something, I don't consider this a softball question. And just to be transparent, I gave questions beforehand because I am voting for Jeremy Dowell and I really want him to win. Total transparency. So something I wanted to talk with you about is I would love to hear what you would say to people like me who I have largely lost faith in I don't call it the justice system, I call it the legal system deliberately because of my personal experience. And then, like I said, my experience is officers lied about me because of their own political bias, and now I feel burdened with having to hold them accountable for that. And that's just a personal thing, but I think I just have so much respect because there's also a macro level for what you are trying to do with us watching the courts in general, right? From the Supreme Court to just awful decisions in state courts. So how do you talk to people about it's a painful thing, honestly, right?
It's incredibly painful, right? I deal with this with all of the families that I work with. So what I do is 100% guardian ad litem work for kids who have been accused of crimes. So what would be a crime if they were adults, but because they're kids, it's acts of juvenile delinquency. That's how it's, that's a deliberate decision, and it's an important distinction. And we can get into that another time. But
and it varies by state.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. So criminal law is different from state to state. There are like kind of overlapping federal standards that have been implemented, but it's up to the states to adopt them or not. And then, of course, there are constitutional protections that should apply regardless of the state.
Which is where my case comes in, talking the Constitution.
Right,
so,
right.
Thank you, please.
Yeah, but for those who have lost faith in the judicial system, the legal system, or the justice system, however you want to call it or refer to it, I don't feel like it's my place to tell them that they're wrong about that. You know, I mean, your experience and this experience of people of color that have been sucked into the judicial system is
the data's there.
It's what it is, right? And I'll give you an example that's really frustrating to me from just this week, the Marcellus Williams case. Are you familiar?
That was painful. Yes.
Yeah.
I think the whole country is familiar with essentially what I think most of us would categorize the state of Missouri murdering an innocent black man. Because the state has that level of power to take lives.
And that's a political decision. We saw the politics of that several times, right? And we can circle back to this, but I think people lose faith in the judicial system when they see politics entering it.
Right.
When they see,
That's such a good point, and that's where frankly, I would call it, maybe I'm oversimplifying, but that's why get on your ballot and vote for someone who will actually live up to that standard, because when it comes to the DA, we're saying the legal system shouldn't have political influence, and yet the DA is a political and elected position.
Right.
So how do you walk that line? You need someone with integrity who understands that requirement for democracy, that we actually keep politics out of the legal system.
Right.
You know?
I'm a very liberal person, and I have...
The L word. It happened on this show.
Yeah, and I don't care if people, would take issue with that, right? And the politics of getting elected to a partisan political office is one thing. There's a process to that, right? You have to get people to vote for you. You have to talk about why they should vote for you. But taking the office and taking on the responsibility and the power that the district attorney's office has, I believe there should be a very strong firewall.
Right.
And I don't believe that's as complicated as some people might think it is, particularly the incumbent. But it's not just our incumbent here. I think DAs across the country have confused those two things, right? So one powerful way I think that you could avoid fusing politics and prosecution is for the elected DA to never step foot in the courtroom. And I talk about that because the moment the elected DA steps into the courtroom, they politicize the case.
Yeah, how could they not, essentially, right? As an elected official, you got to recognize, frankly, your influence on things, right? And that's one of the things I think about public servants who are elected that I always hold very important, which is that you have to know the responsibility of your office and actually, for lack of a better word, police yourself. Right? And I think we have a lack of elected officials in some areas that are willing to hold themselves to a high ethical standard and say, well, I'm going to recuse myself, and yes, that is my option to do that, instead of, being like, I could recuse myself, but I'm not gonna. There's a big difference there. And so thank you for naming that nuance. And another thing that I would love to talk about is some of your other priorities in your campaign, because I know that your experience as a gal has really, or that guardian ad litem has really informed your candidacy, your campaign.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so Republicans in particular, but I'd say DAs in general, tend to talk about things, crime and punishment, right? Like there's a crime.
Law and order.
Law and order, crime and punishment. So, but what they're not talking about, and that simple narrative breaks down when you're sitting in people's living rooms. And as
Yeah.
a guardian ad litem, that's what I do.
Is your job.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to the homes where my clients live, talking to their parents, talking to my clients, trying to solve the problems that they're facing, right? A big part of my job is trying to get services in place for the
Right.
family, that if those services had been in place to begin with, maybe we wouldn't be sitting here in the judicial system. So in a weird way, the fact that the family's in the judicial system, it has all kinds of negative consequences. They have to
Right.
take time off of work, money.
You know it.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
a ton of stuff. It can get sucked into the school system. The school will sometimes expel my clients because they have charges. And I have to fight the
Right.
school on that as well. But, if those services had been in place, there would likely have been better outcomes for that family. And so it's, in a weird way, it's good that I'm now involved, but there's all these negative consequences that the family also has to deal with that I'm involved, right? And so I think probably not a net positive that I now have to be involved in their lives, but at least now we can try to identify, gaps in the social safety net
Right.
and try to get some services in place. And the court has some power and authority to make that happen.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, because to me, I hear you really saying something that we've talked about on this show, which is, if you really want our community to be safe, addressing the root causes of crime,
Right.
like poverty and having people in stable housing, this would go a long way
Right.
to public safety.
It couldn't hurt.
It would
when
not
people are
hurt.
stressed out about
Yeah.
whether they can pay the rent,
Yeah.
then they're going to make worse decisions. Every one of us
yeah.
makes worse decisions when we're stressed
Under
out,
stress,
right?
yeah.
And I try to talk about that and highlight that as an issue. But if you're prosecuting a crime, like if that's your main goal, like I'm in here to prosecute crime, and that's all you think about it. That's the extent to what you think your role is as an elected official in that office, then you're being reactionary, right?
Yeah,
And
such a narrow-minded
Right.
and just a narrow scope that is ultimately being less helpful to our community.
right, and
Yeah.
you're reacting. So let's say that a crime has been committed. You now have a victim, and you have somebody who's committed a
Right.
crime. And so the DA's office is reacting to that. So one of the things I've been trying to draw attention to is I think that the DA's office has an enormous amount of power that can be
Yeah.
brought to preventing crime. So I think the DA's office is positioned very well to understand what led up to the
Right,
crime
yeah.
happening. What were all the circumstances involved? Because they get all these facts, right? Ideally, and they have to look at them and then
To
try
make
to
a determination, right?
Right.
Yeah.
They have to make a determination. And if they have an orientation towards justice, they'll look at that and say, how could this have been prevented? And so I believe that the DA's office should spend an enormous amount of resources working with community activists, community leaders, members of the community themselves. Go into people's houses, talk to them, sit in their living room. How did this happen? The
Yeah.
DA's office could do that. And then try to identify, how do we stop this from happening again? How can we help? How can we be a partner in the success of this community to prevent crime so there are no victims?
Thank you so much. Yeah, for naming that, because again, that's something that really resonates with the guests that have been on this show, is that we believe our strength is community, and community is what keeps us safe. And I find it really strange sometimes where there's that thin blue line, and in my mind I'm like, well, aren't they the community too?
Yeah.
But in some ways I feel like there is this division that is happening, and like, blue lives, like, well, actually there's no one is blue. Like that's a whole other thing than Black Lives Matter.
Right.
And those kinds of really divisive types of discourse that we've been having. And so would you talk a little bit more, because this is when I think our listeners, viewers know that I'm pretty active in the political scene, and so I have had the privilege of hearing you speak and meeting candidates. And what stood out to me and that I really appreciated, I think you've touched on, but I'd love to hear more, is the district attorney has a mandate for justice.
Oh, yeah.
And that, I think, is really important to talk about. So would you mind saying more about what that really means?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I tell you what makes sense to me, right? Because justice is a word that can mean different things to different people, right? As you were talking about with the justice system.
That.
But what it means to me is that the office does not just pursue convictions. So one of the things that a district attorney's office
it's a numbers game.
Right. And that's a political decision.
Correct.
Because they are trying to paint a picture for the voters,
Look
right?
how effective we are. Re-elect me.
We've sent so many people to prison. We've
Which makes me cringe. Like, that is not safety to me.
It's not safety, and it's not safeguarding anybody's rights. Like, if this is a conservative community, so to speak, right, which everybody says and believes it is, like where a lot of people do, right? They'll say this is a conservative community. It's hard to be running as a Democrat in a conservative community or whatever. My point of view is that a conservative community should want a DA's office that respects the power of the office, that is oriented toward justice, that is skeptical of bringing cases.
That
right?
honors innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
Like, I will never forget, Jeremy, when I was arrested and taken to county jail, never been arrested before. The police, one of them looked at me and said, "Well, did you learn your lesson?" I was like, "Excuse me, I'm innocent until proven guilty."
Yeah.
And that was just another painful, like, there are a lot of memories about that, and people end up traumatized from the legal system.
Yeah.
And that's why we need a district attorney that recognizes that that impact is really powerful.
Right.
And that office has the ability to make a positive or negative impact.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And innocent until proven guilty needs to be taken seriously.
Right.
There's a reason we have that, you know, like
it's not just a trite saying.
No, but we kind of treat it like it is, right?
We
Everybody
do.
has it on the tip of their tongues, but nobody takes it very seriously because if somebody gets arrested, so many
must be
people,
guilty.
right?
Yeah.
That's a default assumption. What I was just talking to Chloe, my daughter, about this yesterday, I think it was. I have, over time, talk about faith in the legal system. I sometimes wonder, like, juries, right? Like, so many people have this idea that you're not innocent if you've been arrested. You must have done something wrong.
And that the cops are always telling the truth, which, sorry, the facts are that's not always correct.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And so, so then... how does that translate to the jury system, right? And as somebody, I don't do defense work, so I'm not working with juries or in front of juries and selecting juries. So seeing that from the outside, but having legal training, I'm kind of like, how can that possibly be effective?
Right.
And defense attorneys have great faith in the jury system. So I always find that as kind of the counterpoint to my default assumption, because I hear so many people, I see so many people being reactionary about, you've been arrested, you're guilty. So in the jury system, they must also assume guilt always, right? And
Well,
defense
at least
attorneys
they get jury instructions, right?
Right, and but like the
Hopefully
cynical
they're good.
part of me that I
Right.
have to fight sometimes is like, you know, well, sure, they're going to hear that and discard it, right? The
Right.
judge tells them you have to assume this person is innocent until proven guilty, but it turns out defense attorneys will tell you that jurors do tend to take that seriously. So that's kind
very
of an encouraging thing
Yeah,
about faith in the
absolutely.
legal system.
Yeah.
The jury system is apparently important.
Yeah, democracy. Like,
Right.
well, I mean, if you look at, we talked about that macro angle. Look, there were 12 New Yorkers who heard all the evidence
Right.
and convicted their peer, Donald Trump.
Right.
And people like that, and I think that's a good example of what you're describing.
Yeah.
Is they took it seriously.
They took it very seriously.
And yeah, people like that are doing the business of democracy in our American society. You know.
So then what was the Republican response almost universally was to cast doubt on the integrity of the legal system, right? So they didn't like the result.
That's kind of their thing.
Right, yeah.
These days.
So it was rigged this, it was that,
Right.
you know, and that is going to have ripple effects through our culture for a very long time.
Right.
It really will.
Right.
But you know, talking about the integrity of the jury system, that Marcellus Williams case, where the prosecutor admitted
Right.
that he had used unallowed, you know, racist criteria to disqualify jurors, right? So that in and of itself cast doubt on the integrity of that conviction. And then there was also DNA evidence that was potentially exonerating.
Right.
And so the judge, the Supreme Court of Missouri, the governor of Missouri, for political reasons, declined to,
to save someone's life,
right.
to save a man's life.
Right. And then the Supreme Court did the same thing, the Supreme Court of the United States. So, that is a perfect example of things that really
injure our democracy.
Yeah,
right?
they injure our faith in the system.
Right.
And there's, what can I do about that? Well, what I can tell you is
you
that...
You can vote for a good DA.
Yeah, I think the sort of, there's two kind of takes on it. There's kind of a pessimistic outlook on it, which is that the flaws in our judicial system result in innocent people being murdered by the people of Missouri. It's not just on the governor and the Supreme Court. The people of Missouri have an innocent man's blood on their hands because of that, And in a way, the people of the United States do because the Supreme Court weighed in on it, right? So I'm very grateful that Colorado does not have the death penalty.
Right.
Because the legal system is flawed. And it's a human institution.
Right.
So it's inherently flawed. It's going to have flaws, and you cannot have irrevocable consequences in a flawed system. Like that is anti-justice inherently, right?
I am on the same page with you, and that is something that, is so profound to me. I agree. No death penalty, and again, it's that responsibility of the office is that this is more than just an individual on the Supreme Court or holding the governor's office. The idea of democracy is that we are a collective, and these are actions that have been taken by the state, and they've violated our collective consciousness. And so it was a strange week with that energy, frankly.
And it's a weird time to be running for DA.
Super weird, I bet.
It's weird, but it's also kind of good because
very gratifying.
Well, there's a lot of examples of how not to do things and how to do things.
That part's not gratifying, but maybe motivating is the word, because I might segue to this because I would say, based on what we're talking about, the cynicism that you can have, one of my big things is, well, it's not going to get better if you stick your head in the sand, right? Like, if you want something to change, then there are levels of privilege that allow us, right, to be involved in different ways. I get that, but if you are completely apathetic, I guarantee you're not going to see the outcomes you want. And so I truly believe that the healthiest democracy is going to be just about everyone in this collective stepping up, right? And you're doing your part by stepping up for this office. And
this is one way to contribute to that, right? The idea that really animated me from the beginning was that I'm going to push back on this mono narrative, it's we only hear one side of things, right?
Yes, and that's why this podcast exists,
right?
Because in this community especially, it's problematic. We know we only hear one side of things.
And of course the Gazette and other media sources are very selective about what they cover and how they cover
Corporate media is questionable, I would
very,
say. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
But I would really like to say, there are many of us who are very grateful that you are running as a legitimate alternative to your opponent's failures. We could talk about a few different things, but one of the biggest things that has come up, and I know I've mentioned it to you before, is that, from the public's view, one of those failures is the dismissal of felony charges against the person who eventually became the Club Q shooter less than 6 months later. And I have a little background for the people to give them context. But if we remember, that July 21 case was dismissed less than 2 months after the alleged crime, which was they were loading bullets into a Glock pistol and warning their frightened grandparents not to interfere with an elaborate plan to stockpile guns, ammo, body armor, and a homemade bomb and commit mass violence. And that's from a report, December 2022 report from the Colorado Sun. And then so only 4 months later or so, those charges were dropped and then, or dismissed, right? We have to be careful with the language, but they went on to murder 5 innocent people at Club Q, injure many others, and really traumatize our community. About a year later, your opponent told the media, which one thing I've really found, I was going to use the word detestable, and I'm just going to say it. He only engages with the media. I don't see him engaging with the public a whole bit, which is a problem, I think. So he only spoke to the media. He said they were ultimately dismissed because the shooter's family members refused to cooperate, publicly saying, "We did everything we could have done on that case." Our community doesn't feel that way. And so the question to you, realizing, you have the responsibility that your profession holds and you're a candidate, to the best of your ability, could you, talk a little bit about what you observed, apparently why all that evidence in that summer case that the shooter faced, I would think body cam, law enforcement testimony, 911 calls, for example, wasn't enough to move forward with the prosecution. Like, there are other criticisms of the way that Allen handled the case. The shooter was found with bomb-making materials, but wasn't charged with a crime related to that. And we even found out through, journalism, that there was a suspicion of political bias because the shooter had ties to actually creating or posting on a Nazi website and was the grandson of a Republican elected official in another state. And so the charges that were dismissed eventually were for first-degree kidnapping and 2 counts of menacing. And so this question that I'm posing, that they faced no prosecution whatsoever, though it was clear they were a terroristic threat, it's still very close to the hearts of many people in this community. And I don't think it's something Michael Allen will ever answer. So thank you for being here and to do the real job of a district attorney and be accountable to questions that the public have.
Yeah, well, I mean, so I think there's a lot to unpack there, right?
Yeah.
I think I would start by saying, why is it that people have no faith in his decision-making on that front, right? Mm-hmm. Because he has allowed politics to infuse the job of prosecuting. So that automatically, inherently undermines the decisions that he makes.
Making earlier.
Right. Yeah, it undermines, right? And there's a danger to doing that. I wasn't in the room whenever those decisions were made, right? I don't know what did he base it on? What are the things that were in front of him, right? I mean, this reporting would seem to make some very clear points about how that could have been pursued differently. Mm-hmm. But why do we not have faith in the decision that he made? Why do we not trust him to in an unbiased way, evaluate the strength of the evidence and move forward or not? Mm-hmm. I will say...
I have very personal reasons on why.
Right, exactly.
Can I tell you one of mine?
Please.
His office, when I refused to take a plea and I entered not guilty, I had only faced one accusation, which is what PD said, the accused assault. So when I refused to take a plea, the district attorney's office added another charge, which was obstruction, much lesser, right? Like a misdemeanor, totally huge difference. And to me, the appearance of that was like, oh, this is just a numbers game. They know they'll never get the felony charge on me because that is total bullshit. Mm-hmm. So they threw on a misdemeanor charge to give me more pressure and guarantee a win if we take this to trial, because I'm pretty sure they could have gotten that charge based on what I think what they would have said, and the jury, right? A jury in a conservative county, all those factors. And so that was another painful memory where it's like, gee, Michael Allen, I feel like this is personal.
Right. Well, that's a great point, because a DA's office that is not oriented toward justice will overcharge. They will overcharge. They will charge super aggressively in order to scare somebody who's accused into taking a plea and admitting guilt to something that they're not guilty of.
Right.
And because, and so they'll charge very aggressively so that they can plea it down to something that's maybe a little more appropriate. Yeah. And in your case, it wasn't appropriate at all.
Right.
But in some cases, maybe something has been done, but if you overcharge it and you scare them, then you can get them to accept a plea that's of a lesser, a lesser charge or
We
something.
went a few rounds on plea deals,
Yeah.
and it wasn't until my attorney, listening to my attorney that finally, I ultimately even took a plea deal in my case, which was just another painful thing because I eventually learned, like, that's how most cases
Yeah.
in the legal system are handled, plea deals.
Right. That the vast majority, result in a plea. However, this DA prides himself in, being really hard charging on this issue, and he'll talk about it like, at the county commission. He talks about it, and he's very proud of the fact that he doesn't compromise, is how he puts it.
Right.
But,
Which seems terrible for an elected official because
Right.
you literally you have to compromise to
well, it
get the
sounds
business
good on the
of
campaign trail.
Right.
You know,
for the Republicans.
Yeah, right,
of course, right?
Yeah.
Great point. Well, I think we're almost to time, but something I love to do on this show is provide a balance. Like, we talked about some pretty serious issues, but what's good in your life? Tell us all about the campaign. People have watched this episode. They're like, hell yeah, that's my guy. How can I help him? Tell us all about that.
Well, so the campaign has been, it's been really a good experience. When I started this year, I was planning on keeping my head down and just kind of focusing on my job. And, I was going to pay attention to the issues and vote accordingly, of course.
Yeah.
But when the Democrats approached me to run for DA.
I was transparency. I was on the vacancy committee that did the
Right.
work to thankfully have a great candidate.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you guys did approach me. Whenever that happened, it was like, okay, that's how I'm going to contribute this year, for sure,
Yeah.
But it's been an opportunity to meet a lot of great people as well. And so that's amazing. And I love, ideally the corporate media would have paid more attention by now. I did
know.
just have an interview
Yeah.
with the Gazette. It's going to go in their voter guide.
Okay.
But the TV media, they're not paying any
No.
attention. So I'm trying my best to get to do what I wanted to do, which is talk about ideas, right? To challenge the status quo and
Right.
and show people that there's a different way of doing things. And that's a very gratifying opportunity to
Absolutely.
have.
That's what real patriots do. We look at areas of improvement. We
Right.
give constructive criticism. We want accountability.
And you fight for change.
Yeah,
Yeah.
none of those are bad things for sure.
Yeah.
And so tell us your website and like any campaign events you've got coming up.
So Dowell4DA.
Okay.
.com is so DOWELL for DA FORDA.com. No numbers or anything in there. And campaign events. I think I'm drawing a complete blank on what they're.
We'll
what
edit
they
this
are.
out.
Yeah. So I let's see. There's the Michael Allen and there's the district attorney debate.
Oh, great. Yes.
So
tell us
let me
tell us
back
more
up and
about
redo
the
that.
district attorney debate.
So the League of Women Voters is doing a forum, and I believe it's going to be kind of a debate format.
I can't wait to be there.
Yeah, and apparently Michael Allen has RSVP'd for it,
Beautiful.
and that is October 19th.
I'm going to be there.
At the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Hall off of
24.
24,
Yeah.
yep. I was trying
Excellent.
to, yeah.
Excellent.
There's a ton of League of Women Voters forums that are coming up to highlight the candidates in important races for county commission, state
Oh, yeah.
legislature. So I would urge everybody who's listening to this to check that out and then go and learn about the candidates and support the candidate that you're in support of in those forums.
Absolutely, because I would say, and this is the fun part, it's like, this is my show. I get to say what I want. Is
Yeah.
that, really, I've been in this community almost a decade, and I'm just so impressed that with the progress that we've been able to make on the left. And our ballot this year has some really formidable candidates who are bringing progressive values and smart dedication to making the change in the world that we want to see. And so thank you, Jeremy, for being here. Is there anything else that we want to add about what's good in your life or in the community that you want people listening to know?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your show.
It's a pleasure.
I mean, really, that
Yeah.
is what I'm talking about when I talk about going on the campaign trail and meeting, great people and
Thank
having
you.
an opportunity to talk about important things. What's good in my life? I mean, I've got 2 dogs, 2 cats, and my daughter. And we spend a lot of time together.
Sounds
and
good.
That's how I like to spend my time when I'm not,
Beautiful.
doing work or out on the campaign trail.
Yeah, you're giving like cool dad vibes, right, Chloe?
Yeah, totally. I've never been cool a day in my life, but we'll start
We're saying
now.
it here. We're starting now. That's right. Well, that's a good note to segue into that. We're happy to remind everyone that episodes of Justice with Jax are recorded as a member of the Studio 809 podcast collective here at the Nexus Community Co-working Space in downtown Colorado Springs. So, as always, I ask you, remember to ask yourself these two questions, which is who's telling your story and how are you being the change you want to see in the world today? This is Justice with Jax signing off.